The rain on Viral. 9 fell in slow, heavy drops, each one hissing faintly as it touched the steaming leaves. The jungle never slept. It breathed and shifted like an enormous organism, and even silence here felt alive. The Galactic Coalition soldiers advancing through it moved with mechanical precision, their polished armor cutting through the wet green like shards of light. They were disciplined, confident, and, above all, contemptuous of the world beneath their boots. To them, this planet was merely another reclamation zone, another victory to record. Humanity's resistance was an inconvenience, persistent but ultimately insignificant. The aliens joked about it openly, their translators humming as they compared human rifles to museum relics, curiosities from a primitive age of gunpowder and combustion. Hidden among the vines above them, Staff Sergeant Cole Mercer listened to the faint static of their communications through his scope's receiver. He didn't need to understand every word to grasp their tone. He had heard it before, from enemy commanders, from politicians who'd written Earth off, from comrades who had stopped believing victory was possible. Arrogance sounded the same in every language. Cole's cheek pressed lightly against the worn cheek pad of his rifle. The weapon looked outdated, almost quaint beside the sleek energy arms carried by the Coalition, but it was meticulously maintained, each piece honed through years of patient care. The dark metal bore the dull sheen of reliability rather than glamour. He trusted it the way he trusted his own breath. Cole adjusted his position on the ridge, sinking deeper into the foliage until even the insects ignored him. The ghillie suit he wore was a masterpiece of improvisation, woven fibers threaded with native moss and vines, every inch tailored to mimic the strange vegetation of Viral 9. To an untrained eye, he was part of the terrain. To the Coalition's sensors, he didn't exist. That advantage had taken him weeks to earn. The jungle's heat was brutal, the humidity relentless, but discomfort had long ago become background noise to him. What mattered now was timing. Through his scope, he counted 9 soldiers moving in formation. Their armor was a fluid composite of metal and living material, constantly adjusting its hue to the dim light. They carried plasma rifles that could melt through steel, but they moved without caution, as though the forest itself had surrendered. Cole noted their spacing, the pattern of their steps, the hierarchy of their glances. He found the officer easily, the one giving subtle commands, his armor embossed with markings that pulsed faintly when he spoke. The officer's confidence radiated outward like heat, and it stirred something sharp in Cole's chest. He shifted his aim slightly, but didn't fire. This was reconnaissance, not execution. His mission was to confirm the presence of the Coalition's forward command group, not engage them directly. But every instinct in his body itched for action. The Coalition had raised 3 human settlements in the past month. The survivors, those who weren't taken for re-education, spoke of efficient extermination, of soldiers who laughed at kinetic resistance. The human lines were crumbling, and Command had sent Cole ahead of the main resistance force to gather data that could change that. He exhaled slowly, lowering the rifle. Data. That was the word they'd used in the briefing. Cold, clinical, stripped of emotion. But what Cole wanted wasn't data. It was proof. Proof that humans weren't finished, that a single man with a rifle could still matter in a galaxy of machines and arrogance. His earpiece crackled softly. A voice whispered through the static. Major Hensley, Command's field coordinator. Mercer, status report. Cole spoke barely above a breath. Visual on patrol group. 9 soldiers, 1 officer, heading west by northwest, toward the river basin. Copy. Maintain observation. Reinforcements en route. He didn't answer. Reinforcements meant more noise, more movement, and more chances for the Coalition to adapt. The jungle rewarded stillness. It was a lesson he'd learned long before Viral 9, back in the forests of an Earth that now seemed more myth than memory. Every mission since had been a refinement of that lesson. Patience was power. Below, the patrol paused. The officer glanced at a wrist display, its holographic surface flickering. Cole watched, curious. The alien tapped several commands, then turned to his squad. The group laughed, a low, grating sound that echoed faintly through the canopy. Cole didn't need translation to understand Mockery. He adjusted the scope sensitivity and caught the faint shimmer of the officer's visor display, a playback feed of human combat footage. Soldiers in torn fatigues firing outdated rifles against shimmering plasma barriers, their bullets sparking harmlessly off energy shields. The Coalition had turned human resistance into entertainment. Cole's jaw tightened. He had seen that footage before. It was from one of the first engagements on Mars Colony. He'd been there, watching friends fall while command scrambled for a countermeasure. The memory pressed against him like an old bruise. He focused on the officer again, steadying his breathing. He would not react to ghosts. Not yet. The patrol resumed its march. Cole followed their movement until they vanished behind a wall of dense vegetation. The rain intensified, drumming softly against the leaves. He remained in position long after the last trace of them had disappeared. Observation complete, he thought, but the phrase felt hollow. He had gathered enough intelligence to confirm command suspicions. The Coalition was tightening its perimeter around the Resistance's last foothold on Viral 9. Within days, they would crush it, unless someone disrupted their rhythm. He looked down at the rifle resting across his lap, its barrel streaked with moisture. The weapon was a paradox, ancient in design, yet deadly because of its simplicity. It required no power cells, no calibration cycles, no reliance on digital targeting. It demanded only precision, resolve, and the will to pull the trigger. In the end, Cole thought that might be all humanity truly needed. Thunder rolled across the jungle, low and deliberate. Cole packed his scope and adjusted his ghillie suit, preparing to move. His orders were to observe, but he had already decided that observation alone would not be enough. The Coalition believed humans were relics, fragile, predictable, obsolete. Tomorrow, he would show them how wrong they were. The jungle swallowed him as he descended from the ridge, the rain masking his footsteps, the promise of retribution burning quiet and sure behind his calm eyes. The Coalition patrol advanced with unwavering confidence, their armor glinting with faint reflections of the alien canopy as they swept deeper into the jungle. The officer at their center moved with the arrogance of someone who had never known defeat, each gesture sharp and absolute, as if the environment should bend to his authority. Cole watched them from his perch, unmoving except for the subtle rise and fall of his breath. His finger rested lightly on the trigger, the rifle steady against his shoulder, but he didn't fire. Not yet. Precision was patience, and patience was survival. The squad fanned out, scanning the area with a mix of frustration and disdain. Their equipment sputtered with interference, and the tension in their movements suggested they were beginning to understand something they had never considered before. This jungle did not belong to them. Cole could almost hear their thoughts grinding against the limits of their technology. He had seen this progression countless times. Confidence, annoyance, confusion, and eventually fear. The first stages were already taking root. Cole adjusted his position, careful to shift his weight without disturbing the thick layer of moss covering him. He surveyed the terrain again, evaluating the angles. A few of the Coalition soldiers had adopted a defensive formation, shields raised in response to an invisible threat. They had finally recognized the vulnerability of their open stance, but their caution was too little and too late. Their defensive shields were designed to counter energy-based attacks, not high-velocity ballistic projectiles. Cole doubted they understood the difference yet, though they soon would. He scanned the officer's posture, studying the creature's confident stride. The armor's plating was heavier than the others, almost ceremonial, with layered composite structures meant to repel high-yield plasma fire. That level of protection made the officer even more certain of his safety, and certainty was a weakness. Cole steadied his breathing, counting each beat as he considered his next move. The thermite round he had loaded was volatile, but it would cut through the armor like a burning blade. Still, the shot required a clean breach. He reset his grip and waited for the target to reposition into a precise line of fire. Below, one of the alien soldiers barked a command, signaling the group to halt. The officer raised a hand and examined his wrist display, its holographic interface flickering erratically. He slapped the side of the device in irritation. Even from a distance, Cole could sense the shift in atmosphere. The Coalition's confidence was not crumbling yet, but it was beginning to fray at the edges. They were trained for conquest, not confusion, and the jungle whispered its indifference around them. Cole inhaled slowly, letting the thick scent of damp foliage ground him. He thought briefly of his unit, scattered, exhausted, relying on him to create a gap large enough to breathe through. He remembered their expressions when he volunteered for this mission: concern, trust, and a shared understanding that the odds were skewed against them. It wasn't heroism that drove him. It was obligation, forged from camaraderie and hardened by loss. Every action he took now was for them. The officer took another step, repositioning himself with an air of impatience. Cole tightened his focus. If the Coalition continued deeper along this route, they would find the hidden human encampment nestled along a river bend. The Resistance fighters were not equipped to withstand an assault from this elite unit. Cole needed to prevent that possibility. A single shot wouldn't end the war, but it could halt the advance long enough for reinforcements to reposition. It was a tactical gamble worth taking. He shifted his rifle slightly, aligning the scope with the officer's center mass. A faint tremor of anticipation ran through him, grounded by discipline. The recoil from a thermite round was punishing, but he braced his shoulder and locked his elbow. The jungle quieted as if sensing the tension, the distant hum of wildlife fading into stillness. Just as Cole's finger began to squeeze the trigger, a small movement caught his eye. One of the soldiers broke formation, stepping directly into the trajectory of the shot. He exhaled sharply and eased off the trigger, unwilling to risk a deflection. Impatience had no place in his craft. The delay tightened the knot in his chest, but discipline kept his hand steady. The officer barked another order, and the squad shifted again. This time, their formation opened just enough to create a narrow window of opportunity. Cole felt the moment settle into place like a puzzle piece clicking into alignment. He inhaled deeply, held the breath at its midpoint, and let his world shrink to a single point in space where his round needed to land. He squeezed the trigger. The rifle roared with controlled violence, and the shot tore through the air in a straight, uncompromising line. Cole tracked the round instinctively, though he didn't need to see its impact to know it would strike true. The thermite ignited on contact, and the officer staggered as molten light blossomed across his armor. The soldiers around him froze, stunned by the impossible sight of composite plating dissolving under a primitive weapon. Cole didn't wait to admire the effect. He ejected the spent casing, slid into a new position, and prepared for the chaos that would follow. The jungle roared back to life around him, and for the first time, the Coalition began to understand that they were not the hunters anymore. Panic rippled through the Coalition squad the instant their officer collapsed, the molten glow of the thermite still eating through the seams of his ornate armor. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The jungle itself seemed to recoil as the soldiers stared at the smoking crater blooming in their commander's chest plate. Confusion hit them first, then the dawning fear of an unseen enemy who had struck with impossible precision. Their formation fractured, discipline slipping as they scrambled for cover behind roots and protruding stones. Cole remained motionless, listening to their disarray while the warmth of the rifle's recoil still pulsed through his shoulder. He had expected chaos, but the intensity of their reaction revealed how deeply they had underestimated him. He eased into a new vantage point, crawling silently beneath the layered tangle of vines and damp soil. The jungle welcomed his movement. Drifting spores hid his silhouette, while layers of moss muffled his weight. He knew the Coalition would retaliate in a sweeping arc. Their training emphasized overwhelming fire, and their instinct would be to flush out the threat through brute force. The trick was staying ahead of that instinct. Cole checked his ammunition, sliding another thermite round into place. Each cartridge was a small promise, measured, deliberate, and painfully finite. He had enough for a handful of decisive moments. He needed each one to count. Below, the squad began shouting commands, their voices sharp with urgency. A cluster of soldiers formed a defensive shell around the officer's fallen body, but the damage was irreparable. Their medic waved a scanner over the wound, only to recoil from the heat still radiating outward. They weren't trying to save him anymore. They were trying to understand what could have done this. Cole watched their frantic gestures, the growing fear visible even from a distance. Their shields flared to life with panicked energy, shimmering against the drifting fog. He knew the shields were useless against him. The soldiers didn't. That uncertainty was another weapon he intended to use. A heavy thrum rolled through the air as the squad deployed reconnaissance drones, small metallic spheres that hummed like agitated hornets. They rose above the canopy in a tight cluster before scattering in sweeping arcs. Cole tracked their movements carefully. He had predicted the drones would come, but the jungle's unpredictable electromagnetic fields would swallow most of their readings. Still, he couldn't assume total safety. He pressed deeper into the underbrush, blending into a patch of ferns that clung to a slanted ridge. He slowed his breathing again, centering himself. The soldiers below were hunting shadows, but a shadow that panicked became a target. More troops arrived from the east, their armor marked with stripes denoting elite reinforcement units. Cole felt the shift in the atmosphere as the newcomers took charge with stern, disciplined gestures. Their precision threatened to steady the chaos he'd created. He had to act before their coordination restored momentum. He scanned the environment, searching for vulnerabilities. One of the elite soldiers carried a signal amplifier, a crucial device that could stabilize drone feeds and sharpen sensor readings. If that device came online, his concealment advantage would shrink drastically. Cole adjusted his rifle and focused on the amplifier's power cell. His shot cracked through the jungle, quick and controlled. The amplifier burst into sparks, and the soldier holding it dropped to one knee, stunned but alive. The drones wavered instantly, several spiraling downward into the foliage. Confusion erupted anew. Cole stayed still, suppressing the surge of adrenaline that threatened to push him into rash movement. The goal was disruption, not elimination. Every second the coalition spent reacting was another second the human resistance had to prepare. As the firefight grew increasingly frantic, Cole felt a flicker of something unexpected, an echo of empathy. The soldiers below were enemies, but they were also following orders, trapped in a conflict shaped by arrogance rather than inherent malice. Yet that recognition did nothing to soften his resolve. Survival demanded clarity, and clarity required decisive action. If he hesitated now, others would pay the price. He steadied himself, grounding his focus in the rhythm of the battlefield. Radio chatter filtered through the trees, faint but decipherable. Human reinforcements were approaching from the west, advancing cautiously as they waited for Cole's signal. His mission wasn't merely to eliminate targets. It was to create an opening, a fracture wide enough for resistance forces to surge through. The coalition's faltering discipline had given him that fracture. Now he had to widen it. Cole sighted another high-ranking soldier, this one barking orders and attempting to regroup the scattered units. A well-placed round could shatter that effort. He fired again. The soldier collapsed, and the remaining coalition forces recoiled, their morale buckling under the invisible assault. It was enough. Human fighters burst from the tree line moments later, rifles raised, coordinating with sharp efficiency. They moved through the confusion like a tide, exploiting every gap Cole had carved into the enemy's structure. Plasma bolts cut through the air, sparks scattering across the ferns, but the humans pressed forward with determined precision. Cole watched the shift unfold, satisfaction tempered by exhaustion. He had done what he came to do. Now the outcome belonged to the collective strength of the resistance. He withdrew slowly, careful not to break the illusion of invisibility that had shielded him. The jungle parted for him as he retreated, each step deliberate, each breath controlled. When he reached a secluded patch of rock overlooking the distant river, he finally allowed himself to rest. He cleaned the rifle with practiced care, letting the familiar ritual steady his mind. The echoes of battle drifted on the humid breeze, but he didn't dwell on them. Humans didn't triumph because their weapons were superior. They triumphed because they adapted, endured, and refused to surrender their resolve. Cole finished reassembling the rifle, feeling the weight settle comfortably into his hands. The galaxy would hear about what happened on Virline. They would whisper about the unseen marksman who shattered the illusion of invincibility. And though the war was far from over, the Coalition would never again mock the weapon he carried, nor the human spirit behind it.